It was an ordinary evening when I arrived home, exhaustion from the long workday still clinging to me. Every step up to our modest third-floor apartment felt heavier than the last. As I entered, the familiar scent of home wrapped around me, offering a fleeting sense of comfort. I hoped, just for a moment, that the night would be peaceful. That hope was short-lived. The moment I stepped inside, my eyes landed on Ryan, my husband, sprawled across our worn-out brown couch. One hand gripped the remote, the other loosely holding a half-drunk beer. The television blared in the background, filling the space with noise, but as soon as he noticed me, his attention shifted. "Olivia," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I want pie tonight." I froze for a second, caught off guard by the abrupt demand. "Ryan, I just got home. I'm exhausted. Can we do it tomorrow instead?" I asked, my voice edged with fatigue. His expression darkened. "You're home now, aren't you? Just make the pie. It's not that hard." I let out a slow breath. My mother had always taught me to be patient, to be understanding, to accommodate. But sometimes, it felt like I was the only one making any effort. Still, I knew arguing wouldn't lead anywhere. Maybe making the pie would be the fastest way to end this conversation. Our apartment wasn't large, just a single bedroom, a small living area that doubled as a dining space, and a tiny kitchen. I moved quickly, gathering ingredients, eager to get it done. As I rolled out the dough, Ryan wandered into the kitchen. "Make sure it's apple," he added. "And don't use that store-bought crust." I simply nodded, biting back my frustration. We had a pre-made crust in the fridge, but I knew better than to take the easy way out. I worked in silence, pouring my energy into making everything from scratch, just the way he wanted. An hour passed before the pie was ready. The rich, sweet aroma filled our small apartment, wrapping it in warmth. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that this could shift the mood, that maybe this would be the start of a pleasant evening. But as soon as I set the pie down to cool, that fragile hope shattered. Ryan reappeared in the kitchen, impatiently slicing into it before it had even properly set. He took a bite, chewed, then his face twisted in dissatisfaction. Without a word, he picked up his plate and flung the piece of pie onto the floor. The slice landed with a dull, wet splat. "That was awful," he said sharply. I stood there stunned. My hands clenched at my sides as my eyes flickered from the ruined pie to his cold expression. Every bit of effort, every ounce of care I had poured into making it, dismissed in an instant. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My voice came out unsteady. "What was wrong with it?" "Everything," he snapped. "You should know better." I had no response. No words seemed enough. A suffocating weight settled over me, heavier than before. I looked at the mess on the floor, and for the first time, I saw more than just a ruined dessert. I saw our marriage, fractured, careless, disregarded. I swallowed hard and silently cleaned up the mess, but the ache in my chest remained. This wasn't just about the pie. It was about everything: the lack of gratitude, the constant demands, the way Ryan barely looked at me anymore, or worse, the way he did. And that night, something in me snapped. I needed space. I needed to be somewhere I felt seen, somewhere I wasn't just an afterthought. That's why I went to Daniel, my brother, the one person who had always been there for me. I grabbed my bag and walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of yet another night of disappointment. Daniel's home stood in sharp contrast to the stifling walls I had just left. A cozy two-story house with a small garden in front, it radiated warmth before I even stepped inside. I didn't need to knock. He must have heard my car because he opened the door before I reached it, concern etched into his face. "Olivia?" His voice was gentle, his arms already open as he pulled me into a hug. "What happened?" Tears streamed down my face. My voice trembled as I whispered. "He threw the pie, Daniel." "The pie I made after working all day. He just threw it on the floor." Daniel guided me inside, settling me on the plush couch in his living room. He pressed a warm cup of tea into my hands, his presence a quiet reassurance. "Tell me everything," he urged. I took a slow sip of the tea, its warmth spreading through me. As I began to recount the evening, more than just tonight's events surfaced. "It's not just this, Daniel. It's been this way for years. I kept thinking things would get better, that he would change. But deep down, I was starting to understand the truth. He never would. Remember when we first met at Sophie's party? I murmured, a faint trace of nostalgia in my voice. He was so charming back then. Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. I remember. But you know, he added, people can keep up an act for a while, but eventually, their true nature always shows. I sighed, letting the memories wash over me. In the beginning, everything felt perfect. After we got married, we'd go out on dates, talk for hours, laugh over the smallest things. It felt like we were meant to be. Daniel studied me carefully. So he wasn't always like this? I shook my head. No. Sure, we had disagreements, but nothing like this. Over time, he just became different. More demanding, more critical. I can't even pinpoint when I started walking on eggshells around him. Daniel exhaled heavily, leaning back against the couch. You know, Mom and Dad had their struggles, but Dad never treated Mom this way. Tears welled up again. I know, I whispered. I kept thinking I could change him. That if I showed him how much he was hurting me, he'd see it. He'd stop. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Daniel's eyes darkened with seriousness. Olivia, love doesn't work like that. You can't fix someone who doesn't even acknowledge that they're broken. I lowered my gaze, the weight of his words settling in my chest. I used to watch Mom and Dad argue, I admitted. But Dad always apologized. He always made things right. Ryan never does, I added after a beat. A heavy silence settled between us before Daniel reached out, placing a reassuring hand over mine. Olivia, you deserve better than this. His voice softened. Do you remember when we were kids? We promised each other we'd always have each other's backs. I meant that then, and I mean it now. You need to start thinking about yourself, for once, about your own happiness. His words sank in. The realization, the one I had been pushing away for so long, finally rooted itself in my mind. This wasn't the life I had envisioned. I had been holding on to something that no longer existed. I deserved more. Respect, kindness, love, and it was painfully clear I wasn't going to find any of that with Ryan. You're right, I finally admitted, my voice steadier than before. I can't keep living like this. It's time for a change. A flicker of relief crossed Daniel's face as he gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. And I'll be with you every step of the way. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of Daniel's guest room, casting a soft glow on the walls. As I stretched, a strange but welcome feeling settled over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt rested. The decision to leave Ryan had brought a mix of relief and uncertainty, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. As I made my way downstairs, I found Daniel already awake, standing by the stove, flipping eggs in a pan. The scent of breakfast filled the air. Morning, sis, he greeted, flashing me a warm smile. Good morning, I replied, slipping into a chair at the dining table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. Eat. You need the energy, big day ahead. I nodded, taking a bite. I'm nervous, Daniel, I admitted. But I know this is the right thing to do. He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. Of course it is. It won't be easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself. And you're not alone. After breakfast, he drove me to the lawyer's office. As we pulled into the parking lot, I drew in a deep breath, bracing myself. Inside, we were greeted by Mrs. Caldwell, a woman whose sharp features gave her a no-nonsense air, yet her voice carried a reassuring kindness. Olivia, I know this is a difficult step, she said gently. My job is to make sure you're protected throughout this process. Thank you, I whispered, truly grateful for the support. The meeting stretched on, legal jargon, endless paperwork, signatures. Mrs. Caldwell was patient, explaining every step clearly, making sure I understood what lay ahead. As the days turned to weeks, my life became a whirlwind of meetings, appointments, and more documents to sign. Strangely, Ryan remained silent through it all. He neither contested the divorce nor signed the papers. It was as if he had vanished entirely. That silence gnawed at me. One evening, as I sat in Daniel's living room, I voiced my concerns. It's weird, Daniel. Ryan hasn't said a word. No calls, no messages, nothing. It's like he just disappeared. Daniel frowned, deep in thought. That is odd, especially considering how controlling he was before. He shrugged. Maybe he finally realized he messed up and decided to move on. I hope so, I muttered, though a part of me remained uneasy. Life, however, continued moving forward. I started searching for a new place, a home where I could rebuild my life, free from the shadows of my past. After weeks of searching, I finally found it. The house was everything I needed, bright, spacious, with large windows that bathed the rooms in sunlight. It was a stark contrast to the dim apartment I had shared with Ryan. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. This was my fresh start. Daniel's excitement mirrored mine when he saw the place. This is it, Olivia. This is your new beginning. It's perfect for you, Olivia. A place you can truly call your own, Daniel said as we walked through the house, his eyes scanning the space with approval. A smile tugged at my lips. I already have so many ideas. I want to paint the walls a soft blue, add some greenery by the windows, maybe even set up a little reading nook in the corner. Daniel chuckled. Always the planner. It sounds like a dream. Moving in felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. With the help of Daniel and a few close friends, the house quickly transformed into a home. Every evening, I would return from work and sink into the peace that my new space provided. It was a feeling I had long craved, a space that was truly mine, free from judgment, free from tension. But that peace didn't last. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine. My fingers trembled as I pushed it open and stepped inside, my heart pounding against my ribs. The sight that greeted me made my breath hitch. Ryan. He sat at my dining table, casually sprawled out, his belongings scattered carelessly across the surface. A wave of anger and violation surged through me. This was my home. He had no right to be here. What are you doing here, Ryan? I demanded, forcing my voice to remain steady. He barely glanced up, a smug smile tugging at his lips. What do you mean? This is our house, isn't it? His words sent a jolt of rage through me. No, Ryan. I bought this house after we separated. It has nothing to do with you. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. Doesn't matter. We're still married. That means I have every right to be here. Just then, Emily, my pair, walked in, her face flushed with worry. I'm so sorry, Olivia, she stammered. He showed me his ID and marriage certificate. He said he was legally allowed to be here. I didn't know what to do. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. It's okay, Emily. This isn't your fault. Turning back to Ryan, I squared my shoulders. You need to leave. This is my home, not yours. He smirked, a dark glint in his eyes. Think again, sweetheart. I'm staying. And if you try to force me out, I'll make sure I get half of everything in the divorce. His audacity was staggering. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I refused to let him see how shaken I was. Fine. I needed to be smart about this. Stay tonight, I said coldly. But tomorrow I'm getting a lawyer, and we'll see who actually has the right to be here. Ryan's smirk deepened. Bring it on. I'm not going anywhere. I turned on my heel, heading straight to my bedroom. The moment I shut the door, I locked it and collapsed onto the bed, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person I knew would understand. Daniel, I whispered, my voice breaking. He's here. He says he has a right to the house. Daniel's voice was immediately filled with anger. Stay calm, Olivia. I'm on my way. The call ended, but my pulse refused to settle. Ryan's sudden reappearance, his brazen confidence, it unsettled me to my core. But I wasn't alone in this. Daniel was coming. And with him came hope. Minutes later, I heard the sound of his car outside. From behind my closed door, I listened to the low murmur of voices downstairs. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel came upstairs, his expression grave. Olivia, he began, his voice steady. "There's something you need to know." My breath hitched. "What is it?" "When we bought this house, I had a bad feeling about Ryan. So I made sure everything was in my name." He held up a folder. "Legally, he has no claim to it." Relief crashed over me in waves. "Thank you, Daniel," I breathed, feeling the first real sense of security in days. He pulled me into a tight hug. "We look out for each other, Olivia. Always." The next morning, armed with the property papers and my brother's unwavering support, I confronted Ryan. As soon as he saw the documents, his smirk vanished. The arrogance from the night before drained from his face, replaced with cold realization. "This isn't over, Olivia," he spat, his eyes dark with resentment as he walked out. Days turned into weeks. With each passing day, Ryan's intrusion felt more like a distant nightmare. But I wasn't naive, I knew he wasn't done. The threat still lingered in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Daniel, ever the protector, wasn't about to leave things to chance. One evening, as we sat in my living room, he fixed me with a serious look. "I've been thinking," he said. "We need to be ready for whatever Ryan might do next." I nodded slowly. "I've been feeling the same way. But what can we do?" He hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath. "I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know exactly what Ryan's been up to since you left him." His words sent a chill down my spine. Something told me we were about to uncover more than we bargained for. I stared at him, my mind reeling. A private detective? Was that truly necessary? Daniel let out a heavy sigh, his expression resolute. "I just have a gut feeling about this," he admitted. He always had a protective instinct, one of the qualities I cherished most about him. And deep down, I understood his concerns. "All right," I relented. What did the detective uncover? Without a word, Daniel reached into his bag and retrieved a folder. As he laid out photographs and documents on the table, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. The images showed Ryan with multiple women, some of whom I recognized from our past. But what truly sent a chill down my spine was a document among the pile. A police report. A woman had filed a complaint against Ryan. My breath hitched as I struggled to process it. He did this?" I whispered, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Daniel nodded solemnly. "It looks like his activities have been anything but lawful. This could be our leverage." The realization struck hard. If Ryan dared to make any more moves against me, we finally had something to use against him. A storm of emotions churned inside me, anger, sorrow, disbelief. How had he sunk to such a level? Sensing my turmoil, Daniel placed his hand over mine in reassurance. "We'll get through this, Olivia," he promised. Together. A few days later, it became clear that Daniel's instincts had been right. A letter arrived from Ryan's attorney, filled with wild accusations and veiled threats. He was attempting to claim shared assets and spin an elaborate web of lies about our past. My hands trembled as I read his words. But Daniel, ever steadfast, remained unfazed. "We're prepared for this, Olivia," he reminded me, his confidence unwavering. "We have proof. He can't scare us." Armed with that certainty, we met with Mrs. Caldwell once more. She silently studied the letter and the evidence we had gathered, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she finally looked up. "We have a strong case here," she stated firmly. Ryan's claims were baseless, especially with the documentation we possessed. "We'll counter this. There's nothing to worry about." Relief flooded through me, yet the prospect of facing Ryan in court still loomed like a dark cloud. Daniel, ever attuned to my thoughts, squeezed my hand gently. "We've got this," he reassured me. "I won't let him hurt you again." With Mrs. Caldwell leading the charge, the response was swiftly drafted, dismantling Ryan's allegations while exposing his own misdeeds. The next move was his. What followed was a tense period of waiting and anticipation. Each evening, Daniel and I meticulously discussed possible outcomes, preparing for any scenario. Through it all, his unwavering support became my anchor, giving me the strength to face what lay ahead. Then, on a stormy Tuesday evening, an unexpected knock echoed through the house. Daniel and I exchanged puzzled glances before I rose to answer the door. Standing on the doorstep was a woman, drenched from the rain, her tear-streaked face filled with distress. Her voice wavered as she asked, "Are you Olivia?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Who are you?" She inhaled shakily before responding. "My name is Sophie. I was involved with Ryan." My heart skipped a beat. "Come inside," I urged, stepping aside. Once seated, she began her story, her hands trembling. "I met Ryan a few months ago. At first, he seemed charming, but then—" She swallowed hard. "His true nature started to show." She glanced at me with hesitation before continuing. "I found out about you, about his past, and I knew I had to warn you." "Warn me? What could possibly be worse than what I already knew?" Tears rolled down her cheeks as she revealed the truth. "He became controlling, possessive. And then he started talking about you." Her voice broke. "He blamed you for everything. Said you ruined his life. That he wanted revenge." Beside me, Daniel's expression darkened. "Revenge how?" he asked, his tone sharp. Sophie hesitated before lowering her gaze. "He talked about ruining you financially. Said he had people who could help make it happen." Silence filled the room as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, Daniel exhaled, his resolve hardening. "We can't let this continue." I met his gaze and nodded. "We have to expose him," I said, feeling a newfound determination. "The world needs to see who he really is." The weeks that followed were spent gathering more evidence, with Sophie's help. The deeper we dug, the more deceit we uncovered, his financial fraud, his string of affairs, the trail of destruction he left behind. I wasn't the only one he had hurt. There were others, just like Sophie, carrying their own scars. With everything in hand, Daniel finally said, "It's time to go to the police. He has to face the consequences." As we stepped into the police station, a mixture of fear and hope churned inside me. This was it. The moment to finally put an end to Ryan's reign of manipulation. Would they take us seriously? Would they act on what we had presented? Detective Mitchell was assigned to our case, listening intently as we laid out the evidence. Occasionally, he asked pointed questions, his expression giving away little. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he leaned back and spoke. "This is substantial evidence. We'll conduct a deeper investigation, but based on what you've shown, it's clear that Ryan has been involved in illegal activities." The following days blurred together. The police wasted no time, moving swiftly to arrest Ryan on multiple charges. News of his arrest spread rapidly, and the mask he had worn for so long crumbled before the public eye. The man I had once called my husband was finally exposed for who he truly was. Months passed. With Ryan behind bars, I should have felt safe. And in some ways, I did. Yet, a lingering fear remained, the shadow of those he had once bragged about, the so-called friends he claimed would always stand by him. That fear became tangible one evening. As I arrived home from work, something felt off. My mail was scattered haphazardly across the porch, and the front door bore signs of tampering. A cold wave of panic surged through me. Had one of Ryan's allies come looking for me? Without hesitation, I called Daniel. "Daniel, I think someone tried to break in," I said, my voice barely steady. "Stay calm," he replied, his tone firm and reassuring. "I'm on my way." I waited inside my locked car until he arrived. After carefully assessing the scene, he confirmed my worst suspicions. "It looks like an attempted break-in," he said grimly. "We need to tighten security around here." Over the following days, we took every precaution. Daniel helped install high-resolution security cameras, reinforced the doors, and upgraded the alarm system. We weren't taking any chances. Then, just when we thought we had gained some control over the situation, the alarm blared one evening. Racing to the monitor, we spotted a figure lurking in the shadows outside. Before he could take another step, flashing red and blue lights flooded the property. The security system had alerted the local authorities, and within minutes, officers arrived and apprehended the intruder. Relief and gratitude washed over me. If it hadn't been for Daniel's insistence on reinforcing security, things could have gone much worse. The following day, Detective Mitchell called with an update. Olivia, we have the man in custody. He claims Ryan sent him, but we're still working to verify that. My stomach twisted. Even from behind bars, Ryan was still trying to manipulate and control my life. A few days later, Sophie called. Her voice was tinged with worry. Olivia, there's something you need to know, she said hesitantly. Ryan's been reaching out to people from prison. He's been spreading lies about you. I clenched my jaw, anger and frustration simmering beneath the surface. Thank you, Sophie, I said. He won't get away with this. That night, Daniel came up with an idea. We need to turn the tables, Olivia. We have the truth, the evidence, and Sophie's testimony. Let's go public. Determined to take control of my own narrative, I agreed. Within a week, Daniel's contacts helped arrange a press conference. The turnout was overwhelming. Journalists and cameras filled the room, eager to hear my story. As I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounded. But I refused to let fear silence me. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice strong. Today, I share my story not just to reveal the truth about Ryan, but to give hope to those who have suffered in silence. I recounted everything: the lies, the betrayal, the threats, Sophie's warning, and the break-in. As I spoke, the room was utterly silent. Every eye was locked on me, absorbing every word. Then the questions came. Do you believe Ryan is still a danger? I met the reporter's gaze, unwavering. Yes, I said firmly. But I refused to live in fear any longer. Another journalist asked, how do you feel about him now? I took a moment before answering. I pity him, I admitted. For someone to carry so much hate, he must be truly miserable. The aftermath of the press conference was overwhelming. Messages flooded in, stories from other women who had faced similar horrors. I had unknowingly sparked something larger than myself, a movement of resilience and strength. That evening, as I sat with Daniel, an unexpected sense of peace settled over me. Thank you, Daniel, I said softly. Today, I took back my power. He smiled warmly. You always had it, Olivia. You just needed a little push. The next morning, Daniel arrived with more news. His eyes gleamed with something close to satisfaction. Remember the man who tried to break in? He asked. I nodded, the memory still vivid. Of course. Well, he continued, he's been sentenced. And with all the evidence against him, he won't be free for a very long time. A weight lifted from my chest. That's good to hear. There's more, Daniel added. Ryan has been transferred to a high-security prison. With everything he's done, he won't be getting out anytime soon. I exhaled deeply, feeling something close to closure. Turning to Daniel, I pulled him into a tight embrace. Thank you for everything, for standing by me when I felt alone. He smiled. Family sticks together. As weeks turned into months, life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. I reconnected with old friends, built a support group for survivors, and even allowed myself to embrace the idea of dating again. On my birthday, I hosted a small gathering, surrounded by the people who had become my family: Daniel, Sophie, new friends, and old ones. Looking around at their faces, I realized just how far I had come. The wounds of the past were healing, slowly replaced by the warmth of new memories. Later that night, as the last guest trickled out, Daniel sat beside me. You've come a long way, Olivia, he said, pride evident in his voice. I glanced at him, my eyes glistening with unshed tears. With a little help from my friends. He chuckled. Always.